John 9, 1-12. Jesus heals a man born blind. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming, when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbours and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Is this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that it was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they said. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said.
Good morning, and thank you, Calla, for doing the Bible reading for us. It's lovely to be able to share with you again, and as you can see once again, I'm coming from the kitchen. And this morning, it's all about this guy who was born blind and is healed. And actually, if you read the whole chapter, which we didn't have time for this morning, you would see it's quite a funny story. Not funny as in a joke like, did you hear the one about the blind man who walked into a bar and a table and some chairs? It's really difficult to tell a joke to a camera. It takes a lot of faith to do that, because I don't know if any of you are laughing. There might just be silence. I'm sure some of you are muttering, "There's no change there, Pete," because there's normally silence after my jokes, I think. Anyway, back to the Bible, back to John 9. I think this is quite an amusing story, because this man who is blind from birth is healed, which is pretty cool. But the funny thing is how everyone reacts and what they now think about his healing. We see what his parents think of it, what the disciples think of it, what the Pharisees think of it, and even the crowd has something to say about this healing. But the really funny thing about this story is, if you think about it, everyone in this chapter is blind. Not just the obvious man who was born blind, but the disciples are blind, his parents are blind, the Pharisees are certainly blind, the crowd is blind. You see, they are all blind spiritually. And the funny thing is, by the end of the chapter, we learn that the only person in the whole chapter who can see is the guy who's been blind from birth. And so it's a great chapter to look at when we want to see spiritually. For in this chapter we can find out some things that keep us from seeing spiritually and some things that enable us to see spiritually. And for the next few minutes I want us to look at three things that keep us from seeing spiritually and just one thing that enables us to see spiritually, just as we make our way through these 12 verses in John 9. So let's begin at verse 1, the natural place to start. And in verse 1, we find out that Jesus and the disciples are walking along and they see this man who's been born blind. And the disciples, they have this question. "Rabbi, Jesus, who sinned? This man who was born blind, was it him? Or was it his parents?" Now some of you may be thinking, how could it have been him if he was born blind? How could he have sinned? Well, at the time of Jesus, they actually had some teachers, some rabbis, that taught that you could actually sin in the womb. And that if you sinned in the womb, you would bear the punishment of that sin from the moment you were born. Now, we know that's kind of ridiculous and wrong. But there are others who thought that it must have been something terrible that the parents did, and this is a punishment because of the parents' sin. Now, you might be glad to know we're not going to delve into the problem of suffering today, but rather I want us to see that with what the disciples are asking, who sinned, the man or his parents, we see the first thing that can blind you and I spiritually. It's this either or thinking. Whose sin was it? Either him in the womb, or was it his parents? Either or. It's got to be one or the other. And Jesus answers, neither. They're thinking either this little baby sinned in the womb or his parents did something so terrible that they had a child born blind. They were the only options they felt they had. But Jesus said, neither. And Jesus introduces a whole new way of thinking. And many times we narrow our thinking to only two options, either or. And then we wonder why we can't hear God's answer. Either I have to take this job I don't want and know I'm going to hate, or I have to face bankruptcy. It has to be one or the other. Or I have to get married, or I have to be lonely. One or the other. We put ourselves in these either or situations where we can't see God's will. But maybe God is saying, when we're faced with a job we hate or bankruptcy, what if maybe as God is saying, actually, what I want you to do is move to an entirely different place. It's not either a job I hate or bankruptcy, but it's something else. Jeremiah the prophet says, for I have a plan for you, a plan to prosper you and to not harm you. You don't have to either get married or be lonely. Maybe God wants to use your singleness in a way you never imagined. Maybe He has something. Maybe He wants you to wait for something. Something great. And Jesus was great at this, especially with the Pharisees who were experts at either or thinking. They'd come to Jesus and say, we've got this coin. Who should we give it to? To God or to Caesar? And Jesus would look at them and say, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. He always seemed to have this third option. Or they'd come up to Jesus and said, there's this woman who's married several people on earth and they died. And so when she gets to heaven, who is she going to be married to, Jesus? And Jesus is saying, actually, there's no marriage in heaven. It's a whole new option, something they hadn't even thought of. And we get in this trap of either or thinking. And we think neither of them can be God's will. And maybe you're right. Maybe neither one of those things is God's will. And so we need to just step back a minute and say, God, what's your third option? And if Jesus were here talking to me, what would He say? And that's how we get past this way of blindness. We look past our either or thinking. We ask God to show us His third option. Let's look at verses 6 and 7. After saying this, He spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, He told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. I think it'd be funny, to have gotten together all the people that Jesus healed of blindness and let them talk to each other. Picture them in the local pub having a little bit of dal or something. They're there in the Samson Arms having this sort of conversation. See, the first former blind man says something like, here's how Jesus heals blindness. He touches your eyes and slowly but surely you start to see. And you see men walking and they look like trees, but then it gets clearer and clearer and then all of a sudden you see. But another guy would say, no, He puts spit on your eyes. Another guy is like, it's not spit, it's spit with mud. It has to be both of them together. And another guy's going, no, that's not how it works. He just says, be healed. And then you see. You guys just don't understand how Jesus works. And what's going on here is they're beginning to confuse methods with miracles. Methods with miracles. Look at maybe some of the best known miracles of the Bible. Moses parting the Red Sea. You know that one, don't you? Where God said, Moses, I want you to take your staff, your stick, and stretch it out. And Moses could start to think, the way to get seas to split in two is this stick. This stick has a lot of power. Or the time God tells a guy named Joshua, here's how you're going to win the battle. We're going to march around the city and we're going to blow our trumpets and God's going to give us the victory. And Joshua can all of a sudden start to think the way to make walls fall down is march around them and blow trumpets. Or when Jesus turns the water into wine. I wonder if the next day those same servants were looking at those same pots and seeing if the pots turned the water into wine once again. They tried again, but it doesn't work. So they try and reenact what Jesus did. Maybe if I hold it this way, or maybe I held it in the crook of my arm like this. And they're mistaking methods for miracles. Or the man in our story could start thinking, that mud has something in it. I've got to find that exact spot, dig up that mud and use it, because it's that mud that has the healing power. And he then gets this mud and he starts a sort of mud in your eye ministry because he confuses the method with the miracle. And this happens all the time. We think God did it this way in my life, so you have to do it that way in your life. We confuse methods with miracles. But God has different methods for each of our lives, and the one consistent is we need to depend on him. And we are in for blindness when we start pinning our hopes on the mud. Our hopes have to be on Jesus. And so this man sees. For the first time he can see. For the first time he can see the faces behind the voices he's heard all his life. For the first time he can see what the corner is like where he's begged all his life. For the first time he can see the plants and the buildings. It's for the first time. He's been blind, he's been a beggar, but now he sees. But how do you think his family, the crowd, reacted? Let's look at what happened. John chapter 9 verse 8. His neighbours and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it in my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. Doesn't that sound like a strange reaction? These were his neighbours, his friends. Do they sound excited about the healing? Actually, it sounds more like an inquisition, doesn't it? They just couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that it happened because this sort of thing doesn't happen. I mean, no one in their experience who'd ever been born blind had been healed. And so they let their past experience blind them to their future possibilities. And sometimes we live in the dark because we've convinced ourselves that the light is impossible. But it's not. For Jesus is the light of the world. Is reconciliation in your marriage possible? Well, yes, Jesus is the light of the world. Is it possible that the God who created everything could personally love and care for you every moment of every day? Yes, it is. Is forgiveness possible? Yes, Jesus is the light of the world. Is freedom from guilt possible? Yes, Jesus is the light of the world. Is a real sense of purpose and significance possible? Yes. Is restoration and renewal possible? Yes. Is healing possible? Yes. For Jesus is the light of the world and came to take away our spiritual blindness, and nothing is impossible with God. And we must not let our past blind us to the possibilities of what God can do in our present and our future. It is possible. So we've looked quickly at three things that keep us from seeing spiritually. We've had either or thinking, confusing method with miracles, and we let our past blind us to the possibility of what God can do. So quickly, I just want us to think of one thing that enables us to see spiritually. Let's jump back to verse 7. It says, "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. It's such a simple sentence, especially the second part. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. And this simple sentence helps us begin to learn what helps us to see spiritually. For it is when we choose to obey Jesus in the ordinary that we begin to see spiritually. Jesus says to him, "I want you to walk down through the city streets. There will be obstacles, things will get in your way, it will take some time. But walk and go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And when you get there, then you'll see." And the man does it. Now, as I read it, I was thinking, would I have done it? I mean, would you have done it? Just think this through for a minute. He meets this guy who he didn't know. And this guy then spits in the ground and uses it to make mud and puts the mud in his eyes. Then this guy tells you to walk down the pool and wash your eyes and then you'll see. I think on his way to the pool, he probably had a lot of opportunity to doubt and question. Maybe as he bumped into that Roman soldier who just pushed him out of the way. Maybe when the children teased and taunted him as he tried to stumble on his way to the pool. Maybe as he bashed into one obstacle after another. Maybe as there always felt as though there was one more stumbling block to get over. Maybe he questioned, what on earth was he doing? If this was you, what would have gone through your mind? For me, I thought, this is never going to work. I've tried this 100, 1,000 times before. I mean, how many times do you think he'd wash his eyes wanting to see? How many different pools do you think he'd been to wash his eyes to try and see? And none of them had ever worked. He must have thought to himself, I'm just making a fool of myself. I must look like a fool walking through the streets with these muddy eyes. I mean, wouldn't you have been tempted to wash the mud off so nobody would notice on the way there? But he was obedient, and he waited until he got to the pool. And this man obeyed Jesus in the ordinary. And this is where the spiritual insight starts, when we obey Jesus in the ordinary things of life. Let's go back to Moses. When God divided the Red Sea, God said, Moses, I want you to take your staff and stretch it out. That's pretty ordinary. Stretch it out. And then the sea splits in two. Joshua, blow your trumpet, march round the city. To warriors, that was a pretty ordinary kind of thing to do. But the walls fell down. Jesus says to some people in John 11, I want you to roll the stone away. And when they do this ordinary thing of rolling the stone away, the man, Lazarus, comes out. He's resurrected from the dead. There's no magic spell. It's just the ordinary. He rolls the stone away. And Jesus, he gives his disciples some very ordinary loaves and fish and divides it in their own hands, and they start to pass it out, and the 5,000 are fed, and it's ordinary fish and bread. And Jesus says, I want you to fill those water pots, bring them to me, and the water is turned to wine. And these miracles happen because they obeyed Jesus in the ordinary things. And that's how spiritual insight happens in our lives. God starts with something ordinary. Ordinary obedience. And what's really happening here is that whenever any of these things happen, whether it's stretching the staff out or filling some pots, it is the ordinary step of trust that you or I need to make in our lives that enable us to see. For in those ordinary steps, what's really happening is we're saying in a tangible way, a physical way, a visible way, we're saying, I'm depending on you for this one, God. Not me, but you. I'm not just thinking I'm depending on you, I'm acting in a way that says I'm depending on you and not on myself. That's ordinary obedience. And when this man did the ordinary thing, he came back seeing. Now this morning I don't know what the ordinary thing is for you. It might be an ordinary phone call, it might be an ordinary quiet time, just share time with God, spending time with him each day. It might be an ordinary prayer. But that ordinary step of faith and obedience unlocks the miraculous insight that God wants to give into our lives. Obey him in the ordinary. That's where it starts. Let's pray together. Lord, I recognise I'm blind in so many areas of my life. Reveal to me the areas I can't see. Reveal by your Holy Spirit the things you want to let us see about ourselves and about you. Reveal to us the ordinary steps of obedience that we need to take to unlock more of you in our lives. Amen.